So people were just going crazy, sending out a whole lot of things. And some people were really frustrated. All right, technically we're at 5 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen that I need to share so that we can go on with this. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual college exploration for all Ohio students, sponsored by OACAC. There are some housekeeping things I want to just go over with you. If you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A button to type your question to the presenters at any time throughout this presentation. Your camera and microphone are off. We are in a webinar format, so you are muted, but the panelists can't see you or hear you, which is why we ask you to use the Q&A button. You are welcome to sign up for more sessions. Many of the college presentations are offered on the schedule at www.oacac.org. The recording will be available for this session. They are all being recorded and will be available at www.oacac.org within about a week. I'd like to introduce you to our first session today. It is a panel presentation, and the topic is the value of a liberal arts and science education. I'm going to turn it over to the group now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first of this year's OACAC presentations. My name is Josh Levy. I'm one of the Associate Directors at Oberlin College, and I am one of the 4 panelists who will be speaking with you today about the importance and value of a liberal arts and sciences education. We're all going to introduce ourselves very briefly, and then we're going to get right into this session. So I'm Josh Levy from Oberlin College. Nancy?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Nancy Gibson and I'm a Senior Associate Director of Admission at Denison University. I think I'm throwing it over to Ellen.
Hi, I'm Ellen Turner. I'm Senior Associate Director of Admissions at Kenyon College, and I'm going to turn it over to my friend, David.
And last but not least, definitely not least, David Newberry-Yoakley, Senior Associate Director of Admissions and also the Director of Multicultural Student Recruitment at the College of Worcester.
So we are very pleased that you all have joined us. And so what we wanted to do was just start off and talk a little bit about some of the myths of a liberal arts and sciences education that many of you may have heard or are thinking of. We wanted to be able to address this so it'll provide a framework for what we'll be covering during this session. And we'll definitely make sure that we address these various areas. But just to start with, just wanted to talk briefly about some of the myths that are out there. The first one is that it's not relevant for the 21st century. The majority of employers seek students who have developed the skills that are the foundation of a liberal arts and sciences education. During the next 20 years, actually, the job market will change so dramatically that 65% of the jobs that will be available actually haven't even been created yet, which is exactly why they'll be calling for students that have these skills that you can gain through a liberal arts and sciences education. The second myth is that graduates do not have professional skills needed to land a job. So there actually are more liberal arts majors working for tech firms than those who earned a degree in computer science, actually. At all of our institutions, the majority of students have multiple job offers upon graduation or actually shortly thereafter. So it definitely plays itself out that way. The third myth is that everyone goes on for an advanced degree. So while many of our students go on for an advanced degree, a significant majority move up through their professional lives without having another degree. So there are some that do, but the majority actually don't have an advanced degree. Fourth, you need to have an interest in the performing or studio arts. So liberal arts and sciences colleges do not necessarily cater to students who want to major just in the arts. Although many of our students have interest in performing arts and studio art, we actually require that students pursue an education that encompasses all of the different areas of our institutions. As such, we actually require our students to have work in the natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, and the fine arts to actually be able to graduate from our institutions. So the next myth is you cannot study math and science. So between actually 20 to 30% of our students major in math or in the natural sciences. Many of our institutions have quantitative reasoning requirements or distribution requirements that actually include the natural sciences. So they're actually in the mix so that students are getting exposed to that. The sixth myth is that the curriculum's only available at small liberal arts and arts and sciences colleges. So that's not necessarily the case. So many universities actually graduate students who actually study in colleges of arts and sciences. And so you certainly will see that as an option at some of the larger institutions, the same way that you would see it at liberal arts and sciences colleges. And then the last myth is that all students are politically liberal. Certainly, many of our schools have students that come from a liberal perspective, but actually we enroll students from all different political perspectives. And we also have politically conservative students on our campuses as well. So we definitely encourage good dialogue and various opinions and points of view. So having a political background that's different is important through that educational experience. And so we certainly encourage that. Certainly in an upcoming election, we want to hear all of those perspectives from our various students. So those are some of the myths that typically are out there that we hear about as it relates to liberal arts and sciences education and colleges. So now, before we go further, I'm actually going to turn it over to Ellen, who's actually going to let us know more about the liberal arts and sciences and what it actually means, as well as a historical background. So I'll turn it over to Ellen.
Thanks, Nancy. So, you know, it's interesting to think about this, but liberal arts and sciences education is actually a curriculum. It's a curriculum designed to impart general knowledge and to develop intellectual capabilities, capacities, in contrast to professional, vocal, or a technical curriculum. A liberal arts and sciences education really emphasizes not only the depth of education, but also the breadth, meaning that students are going to be exposed to a wide range of subjects. The breadth is determined by the general institutional requirement for the degree, and the depth is provided by the selection of major and the study of the courses required for the major. And usually the study for the major probably takes up about 2 of the 4 years when you are actually in college. It's interesting to note that the study of liberal arts has its origin with ancient Greek scholars who considered a liberal education to be the ultimate indication of a well-educated person. In fact, this type of education was considered essential for any free individual who was active in civic life. Originally, the liberal arts covered only 3 subject areas: grammar, rhetoric, and logic, or we know it as geometry. Modern curriculums are drawn from, as Nancy already told us, 4 areas: the humanities, social science, natural science, and the arts. A typical degree focuses on the interdisciplinary nature of these disciplines so that the person who's pursuing the degree understands all of the intersectionality that exists among those different areas. Next, David is going to provide us some context with the numbers of institutions that provide a liberal arts and sciences education today. He will also discuss how this type of education might differ between a college and a university. David?
It's an issue. Well, so we'll take over with the number of liberal arts colleges in the country, right? So there are over 5,000 institutions of higher education, obviously in the United States, including small liberal arts colleges, right? About 1,600 you can see are public institutions, general universities. We're in Ohio, so a lot of times I'll point out Ohio State, Akron, Toledo, larger universities. But there are also different 1,500 private institutions or colleges and universities as well too. When you look at those 1,500, about 2,500, about 225 are actually small liberal arts colleges. And so I thought it was interesting to kind of get a sense of how many liberal arts colleges are out there. But one of the points that Nancy made in her initial myths was about that there are other schools, like small liberal arts schools aren't the only place where you can get the liberal arts curriculum. So can we jump to the next slide? Yeah, so here, essentially what we're talking about, oops, what we're talking about here is the differences between, for example, a liberal arts college and a university that was going to offer a liberal arts curriculum, right? So, because you can get them at both places. There's, well, again, the 225 actual colleges, but there are different colleges, universities that also offer that curriculum as well too. So a major difference, I think, it's class size. That's something that right away stands out oftentimes between a university and definitely a liberal arts college. You know, we're talking here, the example gives us 12 to 16 students per class versus a university who often have larger class sizes. And when I think about that experience, that class size experience, one of the things I think about is the attention and relationships that students have with faculty members in a much smaller academic environment like that with 12 to 16 students. I think about accountability. I think about understanding students' strengths and their weaknesses, and then faculty being able to support them. And so if I'm struggling, a faculty member can recognize that in a smaller class size. Or if I am doing really well, they can say, hey, here's an additional research opportunity, or here's an opportunity to present at a conference. And so faculty members in that small class size are able to recognize students' strengths and the weaknesses there as well too. Big difference we're talking about in terms of is discussions versus lectures. You're going to be seeing a lot more discussion-based experiences, or have a lot more discussion-based experiences, and less, not to say they don't exist, but less lecture-based experiences at a small liberal arts college, one of those 225 liberal arts colleges, where at a university that has that curriculum, a liberal arts curriculum, you still may experience some more lecture-based, larger classrooms that tend to be lecture-based, and then tied into who's teaching you as well too, with the graduate assistants teaching and maybe not an actual faculty member teaching, which is again what you'll see at a lot of these other institutions like Worcester, like Kenyon, like Denison, like the number of great liberal arts colleges in the state of Ohio. You'll see that faculty members are the people teaching and interacting and engaging your students at some of the small liberal arts colleges that are like the schools that we represent. And then also an opportunity that faculty are focused on teaching first, and they still have opportunities to do research. And because they're focused on teaching first, again, it ties into the fact that they're the ones working with your students. They're the ones working with our students. And then they do have opportunities at Worcester. They do have opportunities to still take leave and do research as well too. So they still get those experiences. So it's not that our faculty or different faculty members at small liberal arts institutions don't have an opportunity to engage with research and to continue their research and learn. It's just that their primary responsibility is to teach our students first. The next slide I'm going to talk about a little bit are the key attributes of a liberal arts school. And you can see on the screen there are a couple of different key attributes that, that really kind of make the liberal arts education stand out, and how the experience at a liberal arts school is going to be different than the experience at a non-liberal arts institution. Like learning the communication skills our students learn, critical thinking we'll talk about here in a second, the creativity and innovation that exists within a liberal arts education, analytical skills, and also problem solving skills are a couple of the key attributes that exist that students learn through their liberal arts education. Now there's 5 here, right? So I actually decided to pick out just a couple of these to talk a little bit more about, just for the sake of time. But again, these are the types of experiences, the types of learning experiences that we feel like make a liberal arts school distinct. So the first thing I thought we'd talk about is critical thinking. I think that's the major one that when I think people talk about small liberal arts schools, or when we talk about small liberal arts schools, right away, some people might say that liberal arts schools really do offer a degree in critical thinking, right? It's something that is baked into the core of liberal arts. And the reason why we say that is that liberal arts education really encourages students to think deeply about a wide range of topics. They learn to analyze problems and consider lots of different ways to solve a problem, right? When I'm talking about that, I even encourage you to think about our curriculum. Now, I've worked at a couple small liberal arts schools, And this can be a little bit different at each institution, but what I've generally found is that most liberal arts institutions, the curriculum is split into thirds, about thirds, right? The student has a major, right? So my major was communication. So about a third of my courses in my experience within the communication department. And then most schools have some sort of core requirement. And these are different for each institution, but these core requirements, even though I'm a communication major, are still gonna have exposure to math, science, English, history. It just requires the students not just find something that they're interested in, like communication, but it finds that they find that passion, but the core curriculum then helps them be exposed to lots of other different disciplines as well too. So you don't necessarily get the luxury of just identifying one particular passion and then zoning in on that. You have the opportunity to do that with your major, but in about a third of those, another third again, is that core curriculum that again is going to expose your students to other disciplines within the college. And then also that last third, at a lot of places, again, from my experience, the last third, it still gives them ability to explore as well too. It might be a double major for some students. It could be the students pick up a minor, or it could just be all electives. But again, the curriculum is structured so that students are going to not just learn about their area of major, but they're going to be learning. It requires them to learn about other disciplines as well too. And that is what really helps them in terms of being able to critically think and to solve problems. So a liberal arts degree exposes students to a lot of different perspectives and ways of thinking in terms of how we structure our courses and our requirements. And that gives us the ability, our students the ability to embrace multiple perspectives, but also to understand like the different limitations on how they think about problems and how they go about solving problems as well too. It's not just the communication mindset that I'm solving problems from. I'm also bringing in other disciplines that might affect how I look for a solution to a particular problem. So the critical thinking piece is the one piece I wanted to highlight. The second piece I wanted to highlight is I think the analytical skills that are really important in today's workplace. So like the ability to analyze data is a critical skill in today's workplace, right? And so for us, that could mean looking at large data sets and interpreting that, right? It could mean looking at a fragment of like ancient history and being able to look at that piece of history, not just to understand it, but also to be able to articulate what's so unique about it, what's different about it as well too. Or another example might be looking at something that an archaeologist might have unearthed. And again, not just be able to understand it, but to explain it to other people. So I think another thing that's really unique about the liberal arts education is that being able to articulate the data sets, being able to explain what you're seeing is something that's also really unique to the liberal arts education as well too. Like the last point here was making our way through the liberal arts major, any particular liberal arts major, it's going to require that type of analytical skills. And those type of analytical skills are skills that can be used in the job force as well. Last piece I wanted to highlight are just communication skills. Communication skills, if we're talking about oral communication skills and presenting, or we're also especially talking about the writing skills that we feel like we know our students develop at a liberal arts school, a liberal arts requirement, at a liberal arts institution. A lot of institutions, again, not all, some require it, and some other, many liberal arts institutions will give students the opportunity to do research, right? And that research oftentimes requires them to develop a thesis, right? And then not just to develop a thesis, but they also set about proving a viewpoint with well thought out ideas, right? So you've got to learn to write. You also have to learn to write persuasively. Is something that I like to highlight as well too. And the ability to be persuasive is something that as we're talking about how we're doing things in our office, the ability to articulate yourself, but also to say, here's why I think this should happen. Those are skills that we know our students learn at liberal arts institutions as well too. Students also, again, talking about that research and research writing opportunities to analyze and critique their own perspectives using the persuasive language that I mentioned, but also they're bringing in other experiences, tying it back to the core curriculum. They're also bringing in those other experiences that are helping them to articulate and explain why things make sense, or to persuade people as well too. Now, something that often that you might hear is that, well, that's not the type of work that a student might be required to do in a job or in a profession. So we know that writing theses and so forth, writing a thesis is not something you might experience in terms of professional skill after graduation, but the skills required to do that, the analytical skills required to write that type of those theses is really important. The way in which students have to end up usually working with an advisor or a supervisor to say, hey, here's here's something that I found and I've learned, and I want to make sure I checked in with you about it. Oftentimes, that advisor, when the students working on the thesis, may disagree, and the student also has to be able to stand their ground and say, well, I found this through my research, and here's why I think this is the best way to go about moving forward. So our students learn those types of communication skills when they're working with an advisor, and in the future working with a supervisor. They know how to lay out various solutions to a problem based upon that research. Here are potential solutions, and then also to advocate for a potential solution based upon those experiences. Those are the type of communication skills that I felt like I wanted to highlight that liberal arts students tend to learn through their experiences with us.
So thank you so much, David. This is really the heart of our session today, is what's the value of small liberal arts. So thank you for spending a little bit of time talking about that. So, as we turn to the next slide, why do all these skills matter? Why are these important? And I want to just highlight a few reasons for you. So the first is that there was a recent survey done by the Association of American Colleges and Universities. This study found that over 90% of employers who were surveyed want job candidates who can think critically, communicate clearly, and solve complex problems. Okay? They want people who have small liberal arts skills. They want you to be able to think about a question from a variety of perspectives. They want you to be able to talk about your opinions clearly. They want you to be able to listen to other people's opinions and have conversations and debates about the different answers and about the different proposals that people might have. These skills, the critical thinking, the communications, the problem solving, are more important than what you studied. Hands down, they are more important than whether you were an English major or a history major or a business major. This same study also showed that 3/4 of executives would actually recommend a liberal arts education to their children over a pre-professional go to an undergraduate business program, for example. The executives see the value in the liberal arts, and they want people to get this well-rounded education. The second reason why this matters, employers want people who can work together as a team and think differently, but share their thoughts. So much of the world today happens, so much of the work that goes on in the world today happens in teams. It's rare that any of us are sitting alone working on a project only by ourselves. It is much more common that we are working with other people who have different perspectives, different views, different ideas. And it's important to be able to talk with them, listen to them, and come up with one conclusion, 2 or 3 or 4 conclusions that can be presented as possible solutions. The third thing to mention is that 2 years ago, there was a survey done of business leaders. This survey revealed that over half of them prioritize soft skills over hard skills. The soft skills are these small liberal arts, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity. Hard skills are things you learn on the job. So to bring this home to people, there are a lot of small liberal arts graduates who go to medical school. Okay? You learn the medicine you need in the medical school program. They are going to teach you what you need to know from the scientific side of things. What liberal arts graduates come to medical school with are the skills like communication. Can you take what you're doing in the classroom, or can you take what you're doing with a patient and explain it in an easy way for the patient's family to understand? That is incredibly important. Those are the soft skills. It is hard to learn how to do that. It is easier to teach you the hard skills you need. Um, the next thing is that, for example, in tech today, there are lots and lots of people who can serve as data analysts, coders, engineers, but companies don't need thousands and thousands of those. The founder of OpenTable, the online reservation service, said, we can make do with a dozen people to do that. What we need are people to look at the data and humanize it. We need people to go and talk with the business owners and help them understand the data that we have collected on them, and help them see the advantage of changing the behavior that they have, whether it's maybe they shouldn't be open for lunch on certain days or open on dinner on certain days. That is not a hard skill, that's a soft skill. And so coming from a small liberal arts college or education, you're going to have those skills. Earlier, Nancy referenced a study that estimated about 65% of the jobs that students entering middle school now are going to hold don't exist. So how do you prepare for a job that doesn't exist yet? You can't say, I'm going to go and study these things. You have to get that well-rounded education and be able to approach things from different perspectives. And that's what a liberal arts education provides you. Tied to this, the world is changing. We know that technology is making some jobs obsolete. People's jobs are being replaced by computers or by robots. The things that the liberal arts prepares you for are things that robots can't do. They just can't do those. They don't have those soft skills that really you are taught at a liberal arts curriculum and that you're taking into the workforce with you. Lastly, the liberal arts helps you stand out. There are lots of liberal arts graduates who are working in tech fields, and that's because they have the skills they need in tech and programming, but they also are interesting people. They haven't just done one thing with their entire college career. They've done several things. They've done history classes, religion classes, dance classes, art classes, neuroscience classes, and they're bringing what they learn from all those classes into their tech jobs, and they're able to approach things from different perspectives. So those are some of the reasons why these attributes matter, and why when you get out into the real world, they are important. And if we switch to the next slide really quickly, you'll see that here are examples of some big companies that you've probably heard of, whose CEOs are actually graduates of liberal arts colleges. So Netflix down there in the middle, the CEO went to Bowdoin College in Maine and studied math. He didn't study video streaming platforms. He didn't study movies, although he may have watched a lot of movies. The CEO of YouTube went to Harvard. Yes, wonderful institution, not necessarily thought of as a small liberal arts school, but she pursued a course of liberal arts study in literature and history. And then lastly, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, a big Wall Street company, went to Hamilton in upstate New York and studied government, not finance, not economics, not business. So you really can be incredibly successful, even coming from a liberal arts education. You can head a Fortune 500 company and do great things, even if you have gotten a degree in something that doesn't relate exactly to what you are studying. David, you're muted.
That is my bane of existence, the mute button. So we want to just have this time. We've got about 15 minutes left. And so the first thing I want to do is encourage you to submit questions for us in the chat. Right. So if you have a question, I'm sorry, not the chat, the Q&A is what we have an option of. So hopefully we have a few questions, but in the meantime, we've got our different contact information up here as well too. And so if you do have questions for us about, I would say, our individual universities, which is fine, but even more so, questions about the liberal arts experience. I'm always happy to take my Worcester hat off and speak to from I'll say 20 years. I know there's plenty of folks on the call that have more experience than me, but 20 years of experience working mostly with liberal arts schools. And I think I would say for the most part, the people on the call have those same experiences. And so if you have a question or you have some thoughts or something you want to learn more about the liberal arts institutions, feel free to reach out and use our contact information to reach out to us.
Josh, one person had a question about the survey that you were referencing, if there was a link or a way to get that survey to participants.
That's a good question. I will have to dig through all of our notes and see if I can find that one.
Okay.
Let me think of the best way to do that. I think if the person, I assume we're going to be getting the contact information for everybody in this session, so I will work on that and I will then share that with everybody. And I'll share some other links as well that highlight some of the points.
Excellent, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, do we have any additional questions at all?
I'm sorry, there was one question about that I had answered about all students at liberal arts colleges are politically liberal, which is a myth, but also asked about college faculty and I had heard that they're typically politically liberal. And so I had answered that question in the chat, basically indicating that it'll vary from campus to campus. You have faculty that are conservative and liberal. Some campuses may have some that are more liberal than others. You know, it just depends on the campus, but you definitely have people that are on both sides of the political spectrum on campuses.
Yeah, Nancy, I would even add to that. You'll find people on the full spectrum within departments. You know, I think about the political science department at my particular institution, and we have people that are wide across. They're on all ranges. So I think that happens, and I see both Josh and David shaking their heads. So that's their experience as well.
Well,
absolutely.
I was just going to add that I think that sometimes what can happen with small liberal arts schools is that, you know, if we're similar in size, you know, right, and similar in terms of class size, people assume that the experience is the same at all institutions, or that students are the same at all institutions. But that's a great reason to get out and to actually visit schools, because, you know, the curriculum might be similar and might have some things in common. But when you get on those campuses, our student bodies can be very different. A student might come to Worcester and say, you know what, this is not the best fit for me. That's looking for a liberal arts school may come and say, this is not the best fit for me, and head to Denison, Kenyon, or Oberlin and go, wow, this feels great, right? And so that's the one thing to highlight is like our students have completely different personalities, our faculty, like you have to get to these institutions and visit different liberal arts institutions to make sure you can understand what the students are like and what the faculty is going to be like, because it can be completely different across the board.
I do think, to be fair, David, that college faculties in general, or university faculties in general, have gotten the reputation of being more liberal.
Yeah.
And part of that is because they push people to think about ideas and to not just sort of stay in one's own parochial space.
Amen.
And so therefore they're asked to move outside their comfort zone. Yeah. And I also think that faculty as a result may come across as being more politically liberal, but in fact they're really being ideologically liberal in terms of pushing kids to think about things broadly. Don't you agree with that, Josh?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Here's another question. Do you find a difference between high school students who come from liberal arts high schools, so classical schools, and those who don't? Does anybody want to take that?
I'm happy to start on that.
Sure.
You know, again, it's going to depend upon the individual, but I do think that students who've been at classical high schools where they've been pushed to think in lots of different ways and also been pushed to articulate what they think, either in writing or also in speaking, tend to hit the ground running when they hit any one of our institutions, because they already sort of have a sense of what's going to be required of them. And as a result, I think they move further faster. And other students who, this was definitely my experience when I went from my high school to my collegiate experience. When I was in high school, I just spit back the information the teacher was giving me. I did not interpret it. I didn't analyze it. I didn't do anything. And at all of our colleges, we require that students are interpreting the information, they're analyzing it, and then they're giving back their opinion based on that analysis. And so I think students who have been in a more classical situation have been forced to move ahead a little bit more quickly, but I don't know, what do you all think?
Yeah, the other thing I would add to that is I think students just in general who have come from high schools where there's a lot of discussion-based learning happening tend to do extremely well at liberal arts institutions. And I think they make a pretty smooth transition as well. So whether you're, from a high school that tends to be more liberal arts, or if just in general your high school has more discussion-based courses, I think they tend to just say, hey, yeah, this is just like what I had in my high school.
Nancy,
I have nothing else to add.
So I would throw in with that too, is that it doesn't mean those students aren't still open to exploring and that they always know exactly their path. I think it in terms of discussion and how they're involved in conversations and how they write and how they make points, absolutely. But I just think of with us, I always think of anthropology, right? Like I very rarely go to a high school and meet a student who's like, I'm going to be an anthropology major, because they haven't had those experiences, right? Like they haven't had those. I mean, high school, I mean, it's English, history, math, science for the most part. There might be some variety in there, but oftentimes I think students do lack the exposure. And so even though they may have some certain advantage in terms of how they read, write, and learn, they're still coming in and discovering new paths and new potential careers, career directions as well too. Just to kind of maybe throw that out there.
And I would add to that that's what liberal arts is about, is saying that you think you want to study one thing, but we're going to give you 40 other things that you could potentially study. And you might take a religion class day one and say, I know I want to be a religion major, but after this class, there is no way in the world I'm going to do this. It is so not what I thought, but I'm taking this, philosophy class, and that has really struck a chord with me.
Yes.
That's what liberal arts is about. It's about not locking yourself in from day one, which can happen at other institutions and other forms of education.
That's so true. The other thing I was going to add was so many of our students come in undecided, or they've got multiple areas that they're interested in. And, once they get a chance to pursue our liberal arts curriculums and they're taking a little taste of everything, there may be things that they didn't even expect that they would be pursuing. My daughter's a perfect example. She actually went to Denison, started off in psychology and neuroscience. When she graduated, she actually majored in psychology, minored in music. So it went a different direction for her. And so that's such a very real thing that we see on our campuses, and we encourage that.
That exploration is really key.
And to still be able to finish in a 4-year period of time.
Yep.
Exactly.
Because that, and I kind of described a little bit of the curriculum, a general curriculum at liberal arts school. But because of that core curriculum, it gives students, if you don't know, I remember starting at Worcester, and my dad was, and I thought I was gonna be a math major, Josh, right? So math was my best subject area in high school. I'm gonna be a math major in college. I was really probably undecided, but I got into college calculus class, found out pretty quickly I was not gonna be a math major. Called home, and my dad understood liberal arts better than I did at the time. Called home, my dad said, continue to explore, continue to take your liberal arts curriculum, and something will jump out at you.
Yep.
That next semester, I took a communication class, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it at the time, but I knew I loved it. And so that ability to explore, but also to finish in a 4-year period of time, especially in terms of finances and costs, to finish in a 4-year period of time is something that you'll see at a liberal arts school as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I also, Nancy, just want to underscore what you were talking about with making connections, because I think that is so important. 2 years ago, the faculty at my institution approved an environmental studies major, and they decided they could not do environmental science, that they would do environmental studies, because you cannot understand the science of of the environment or of climate change without understanding economics, without understanding political science, without understanding some sociology, and actually some anthropology, as David was just talking about, and some history. You've got to have all those perspectives to be able to do it. So I think the intersectionality of everything and being able to understand where it all fits is a true attribute, as Josh was talking about, of the education. Any other questions have come in, Nancy?
I think we've answered all the questions that have come in so far. So if anybody has a final question, we've got a little bit of time left for that.
Can we maybe, I know we have some examples, can we maybe give an example of a graduate? Can somebody lead with an example of a graduate that, Josh said we can do anything, right?
Yep.
Does anybody have a great example of a student that used their liberal arts background to do anything?
I've got a great one. Some of you may have heard of Jerry Greenfield, co-founder of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream. He went to Oberlin College as a chemistry major. And yes, there's some chemistry needed in making ice cream, but he took his entire education to Ben and Jerry's in terms of the food, but in terms of using healthy products, using locally sourced ingredients. But now, even though he's not with the company, it's an incredibly socially active and socially aware company, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. And again, he's not with the company, but he still has some sway over the current CEO. And he's basically said, you know, people need to be able to share their opinions about the issues of the day, and you can't stifle them. You can't let them not share their opinions in some way. But he got this holistic picture at a small liberal arts school.
Awesome. Chemistry to ice cream. I love that.
Yeah.
Anybody else
That
have an
one I can
example?
share. Many of you are familiar with Disney. So Michael Eisner, who is the former CEO of Disney, graduated from Denison, and he had a Bachelor of Arts in English. And then he also had theater. So he was a double major in both those areas. And so just to have that foundation, you know, led him to lead one of the largest, you know, companies around. And so, and then he was able to give back. And that's one thing that I think all of our institutions, our alumni do, is give back. And so we actually just gave us a great gift for our Michael D. Eisner Center for the Performing Arts. So we now have a building that we opened last year with a donation from him. And so they can go on and do so many amazing things.
Great. Well, I think that Ellen, do you have a story you want to share as well too?
Oh, go ahead, David.
No.
Share first. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to just say that I think that those two examples there just kind of highlight that ability to do anything. And again, that there's skills that you learn even outside of your department through experiences outside of your actual major that will influence, you'll be able to draw upon and use as a professional as well too. And I think that really kind of screams, again, the value of liberal arts to me.
So Tom Vetter, who graduated from Kenyon and does Pod Save America, he graduated with a degree in philosophy. So nothing about English or communications necessarily. He worked as an assistant press secretary for President Obama. Again, he was a philosophy major. And so everything that he picked up in terms of his political science came along from some political science classes that he took while he was at Kenyon. And then as Josh talked about, he continued to learn on the job because he had great analytic skills, he had great writing skills, and he had great cooperation skills with his peers. David, I don't know if you have somebody you want to highlight.
Well, when I thought about this, when I looked at that slide that we had, the last slide with the different leaders, and I started to think there are some great examples of CEOs, right, that are liberal arts, come from a liberal arts background. But I also thought about like providing some more maybe like everyday examples of liberal arts, because again, not every one of our graduates, right, is not going to be a C, right? So providing real world examples. And so I was going to go with a young man named Mamadou out of Chicago, New York, who's a neuroscience major and is now doing like voiceover work in New York City, right? And then actually took it home, right? I took it to our house. So my wife is a Worcester grad, right? It was a classics major and a Spanish major. And then went on after that to earn her a master's in women's studies and religion, right? We got to Columbus in 2005 or so, and she just happened to get a job at Abbott Laboratories, right? And she was at that point when she started there, because again, she is, fresh out of her grad school program, not a lot of business experience. So she kind of started this, right there at the bottom. And then very, very quickly, within like 6 months, became one of their managers for public policy. And what they really appreciated about her was that she didn't have a public policy background, right? But the perspectives that she had in terms of like the classic perspective, the language perspective, she's always been passionate about cultures as well too. The way she solved problems and solved problems were very different than people who were trained in those particular areas. And so that was something that allowed her to move up very quickly. So then we transitioned to Worcester. I take this great job at Worcester, and she's like, what I'm going to do? And now brand manager for certified Angus beef in Worcester. Again, a completely another different transition to marketing. But again, very quickly able to move up because, again, I think one is work ethic, and I think that liberal arts schools definitely teach that. But very quickly able to move up because, again, it wasn't about her degree. I have a degree in marketing. I have a degree in business. But her ability to understand, to kind of tie things together, and then also to be productive as well, too. So it's a little more of a homegrown example, but I think it's an example of a real life experience that you can expect, more day-to-day experience that you might be able to expect from a liberal arts graduate.
Mm-hmm. I love that she was a classics major.
Yeah.
Panelists, I'd like to thank you for your expertise and your time and your sharing this afternoon. It was wonderful. For attendees, there will be a quick 4-question survey after you close the window. We encourage you to sign up for any more sessions. Its schedule is available at www.oacac.org. And as stated earlier, recordings will be available. All sessions are recorded and will be available also at the oacac.org website. Thank you very much for your attendance. We appreciate it, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.